In 1936, 200 unemployed men walked nearly 300 miles from Jarrow in the northeast of England to the House of Commons in London to ask for work. It became known as the Jarrow March, or Crusade, one of the defining moments in British history.
My name's Sophie, and I've just taken my GCSEs at Jarrow School. But believe it or not, I hadn't even heard of the Jarrow March until around about 2 weeks ago. So I'm really eager to find out a bit more about it and understand why it happened.
Jarrow, which sits on the south bank of the River Tyne, grew from being a coal mining village to a shipbuilding town. By the 1890s, it was booming, attracting migrants from Scotland and Ireland. Jarrow's one and only shipyard, Palmer's, had employed 10,000 people, but in 1934, it was suddenly shut down. Sophie wants to know why Palmer's was closed and is looking for answers in the Tyne and Wear archives with historian Matt Perry.
Is there anything that you could tell us in regards to when they closed the shipyards?
The big shipbuilders formed an organisation called the National Shipbuilding Securities Limited, run by Sir James Lithgow. His idea was to close down and demolish bits of industry in order to allow what's left to thrive. So you restrict output to get prices up, so you're playing the market. And one of the yards that they decided to close was Palmer's. So it wasn't that Palmer's was out of date or couldn't produce ships anymore. It was purely from the point of view of this policy of restricting output.
Not only did the shipbuilding cartel close Palmer's, sealing Jarrow's fate, they decreed that ships could not be built in Jarrow for another 40 years. Ellen Wilkinson, Jarrow's Labour MP, backed a plan to open a steelworks on the shipyard site, which was blocked by the steel industry. She accused politicians, bankers and businessmen of murdering the town. With 1 in 2 people now unemployed in Jarrow and a child mortality rate twice the national average, the Conservative government commissioned a report on the consequences.
So, Palmer's Yard at Jarrow provides the most complete and tragic picture of the series of events that have led to this investigation. Prolonged unemployment is destroying the confidence and self-respect of a large part of the population. Their fitness for work is being steadily lost, and the anxiety of living always upon a bare minimum without any margin of resources or any hope of improvement is slowly sapping their nervous strength and their powers of resistance.
So that means that the government knew how bad things were,
Yeah.
yet they still did nothing when the people from Jarrow marched.
Yeah, that's true.
Throughout the 1920s and 30s, thousands from Britain's industrial areas marched to London to protest about unemployment in what's known as the Hunger Marches. On October the 4th, 1936, the Jarrow Marchers set out to put their case to Parliament. It took the men a month to march the 300 miles to London, sleeping in church halls and workhouses. Regular meals along the way led to many of them gaining weight after prolonged periods of malnutrition. Following their journey, Sophie's listening to the testimony of Harry Clark, who as a child marched the first few miles and remembered the conditions in Jarrow at the time.
15 of us occupied 2 rooms. We were living on top of each other. You'd see women, the poor women, the poor mas, bring these kids up and out, and you could see it in them. In the malnutrition, you could see it. Panty legs, knock knees, cross eyes. These were not uncommon when I was a lad. Malnutrition, lack of nutrition.
The marchers wanted to present their petition with its 11,000 signatures in person to the government, but the authorities had other ideas. Sophie's discovered from police reports in the National Archives that the marchers were sent on a riverboat trip to Tower Bridge whilst the petition was presented to Parliament behind their backs. She wants to ask her local Labour MP, Stephen Hepburn, about how he thinks the marchers felt about being shut out yet again.
Having known some of those marchers, I know the sadness that they felt and the despair that they felt when they got here and were treated that way.
And was the petition never seen again?
Never seen again. It'd be filed somewhere, and at the end of the day, they were given their train fare and sent home. When they got home, they found that their benefits had been stopped. Their families were in absolute poverty and dire consequences, dire straits.
When people say that the Jarrow March achieved nothing, do you believe that's true, that they did achieve nothing?
They achieved nothing when they got here. They achieved nothing at all.
Yeah.
But in the longer term, those same men were fighting with members of the establishment, and they all went through a really awful experience together, fighting shoulder to shoulder against fascism. And of course, after the Second World War, they came back and they said, never we're going to go back to the days of the Jarrow March. And the reason why the Jarrow March was on their mind is because it had been in the cinema every day, 4 times a day, showing the progress of the march. So the Jarrow March symbolises poverty, struggle, despair. And that's why we've got a landslide Labour government, that's why we've got the welfare state, and that's all thanks to people like the Jarrow Marchers who put it in those people's minds that would never want to go back those days in the 30s.
Sophie's meeting Emma Hardy, a curator at the Jeffrey Museum in East London. She wants to hear Sophie's reaction to a painting of the march.
Well, obviously these are quite upper class people by the way that the woman's sort of dressed and the stuff that you can sort of see around them. Like, these look like expensive sort of glassware, crystal things. But the way that they're sort of, he doesn't look bothered at all. He's just sort of very passive about the whole thing, as if it's nothing and that he's not concerned with that sort of thing, as if it's meaningless. Like, they just don't seem to really care.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. So there's this massive divide between the people in the street and these two people in the interior, in the foreground of the picture.
It's a little bit offending, in a sense. It just sort of makes it seem as if people, in a sense, not weren't bothered, but knew it was all going on and still sat in their own sort of little world and just thought, oh, there's the poor people coming in. And even the fact, like, they don't have faces or anything. They're just like little blobs. It just makes them sort of seem unimportant. For 200 of them to go down to represent everyone else, to try and get this change so everyone could get their jobs and essentially their jobs back from everything that was taken away from them by the cartel closing Palmer's and the other cartel closing the steelworks. And I do think that it is an important thing to do, even today. People should use their voice through protest, they should. It did make us feel a little bit ashamed that I hadn't looked into it or hadn't even heard of it, it made us feel a bit ashamed.
But you've made up for it, so.
Yeah, I've made up for it.